And so I'm an entomologist. I'm down in the San Antonio office. Let me make this thing go away, hide that, so that way you guys shouldn't see any black boxes on there. I'm down in the, or up, I guess, to you guys in the San Antonio office. And I'm going to cover like a little bit about kind of an Into 101 intro to insects type of a thing, kind of get you to appreciate insects a little bit. And then we'll cover integrated pest management and how to kill the ones that you maybe don't want or prevent them from getting into your garden. A lot more prevention type stuff than actually grabbing that can to try to spray them. So I'm going to skip through a couple of these slides. So there are tons of insects on the planet. And if you look at this graph, there are more insects than there are combined living things. So we cross them all the time. There are just tons and tons of different species, many more species that we probably haven't identified yet. And the majority of insects that you're going to find in the landscape that maybe wandered their way into your house even are going to be considered beneficial or neutral. They're just there. They're not really doing anything bad. They're not necessarily doing anything particularly good. They're just there. But there's a small percentage of insects that are pretty harmful. And if you think about it, we spend a lot of money on those harmful insects. But the point that I just want to make is that most of what you find on your plants are probably not doing anything to warrant getting worried about it. Of that small percentage of insects that are harmful, the less than 5% of all species we estimate, because we don't know all the species out there yet, they do cost us quite a bit of money. And if you've ever had bed bugs or termites, you know that's a huge check that you're writing to that pest control company to get rid of those bugs that you definitely don't want in your house. But even just thinking about plants that maybe have succumbed to some insect damage, things you've had to replace because the bugs ate them down, pesticides that you've had to buy, that kind of stuff. We put a lot of money into those bad ones. And then, we've got mosquitoes, considered the deadliest animals in the world. Those transmit diseases, and human life is an invaluable cost. So those small ones that are bad are really, really bad. And the bad ones that are economically important are the ones that most entomologists are studying and trying to figure out ways to prevent. The ones that are neutral, there's no money to study those. So it's usually amateur entomologists, or it's a hobby on the side, something like that, because there's just no drive to kind of study and understand some of those guys. And so we'll talk about ways that insects can be beneficial and ways that they can be bad, and hopefully give you some tips and clues to be able to identify which one of these two is a good guy and which one is a bad guy. And, up close, these two insects have some differences. The body shape's a little bit different. The legs look a little bit different. But in your memory, or even if you just see one on the plant, it's really hard to know sometimes if it's not something you do all the time, like I do, if it's a good guy or a bad guy. So we'll talk about how you can kind of find some clues in the environment or looking at that insect to identify the ones you want to leave and the ones that you don't. The leaf-footed bug there, not this species in particular, but we have a species that's awful on tomatoes. And everybody grows tomatoes in Texas, so you've probably dealt with them before. And you wouldn't want to leave that leaf-footed bug assuming it was an assassin bug like the guy on the right, which is going to eat aphids and other things for you, and vice versa. You wouldn't want to see the assassin bug, think it was a bad guy, kill all of those, and then you come back out and you find that your aphids or your mealybugs or some other insect pest has gone rampant because that natural enemy wasn't there to keep it in check. We'll also look at some damage that insects can do. And sometimes you can just look at that damage and get an idea of who is doing it. I'm going to show you some videos here in a minute of different mouth parts, how they work, but then also pictures that correspond with what the damage looks like that those mouth parts can do. So if you, even if you take a picture of something and you send it in to me, email it to me, I can usually give you an idea of who I think it is. We may not be able to know exactly who did it, but you'll find, and you've probably found that in your landscape, especially when it's hot, and it's hot most of the time in Texas, the insects come out and feed at night and do the damage. And then in the morning we see it and we don't know who actually did it. So being able to identify this type of mouthpart does this, we can narrow down the number of potential bugs that are doing this from millions to a handful. And that's a lot easier to try to wrap your brain around or find a targeted approach to try to manage them. And I'm going to I don't know. No, I guess I won't skip through this slide just yet. But if you look at the way that insects fall into the grand scheme of living things, all insects are animals. Sometimes people are surprised by that, but they are animals. They breathe in a way not like us, but they have organs inside of their body, or organ systems, maybe not necessarily a lot of really individualized organs like we do. They reproduce, they move, they have to eat, and they need water in order to live. So they are considered animals. And then they're in this phylum called Arthropoda. And phylum is the next rung on the hierarchy ladder, right? Kingdom is humongous. Arthropoda, that phylum is a little bit smaller. And all things that are an arthropod are those that have an exoskeleton. And so entomology is technically the study of insects and their relatives, and it really could be said that it's the study of arthropods, even more so. But there's just so many insects in this group, in this phylum, that's usually what people are looking at as opposed to the other ones. So they have an exoskeleton that they have to shed, just like you see with that picture at the bottom. They have segmented body and jointed appendages, so they can move. They're not stock still. They have to be able to move even though they have that exoskeleton. And there's 5 different types of arthropods, 5 different classes. Crustaceans. So if you eat shrimp and you peel off the shell to get to the meat on the inside, you're peeling the exoskeleton. They are the cousins of insects. We have arachnids, which makes sense to most people. Centipedes, millipedes, and then the biggest class of arthropods is insects. And we're not going to get into family, genus, or species. There's just too many of them. But if we have time, we'll look at some of the common orders of insects so that you can better identify them when you're trying to figure out what it is that's eating your plants, what it is that you found, how you figure out where to go in that guidebook or Google or whatever. Knowing the order usually helps make it a little bit easier. I'm going to skip through this thing because we just talked about it. So crustaceans mainly are aquatic, not really a gardener's issue, but we do have some land crustaceans like the sow bugs and pill bugs, roly-polies, whatever you want to call them. These isopods is what they are. They're moisture lovers, and so they may become an issue when we have a whole lot of water, or you're overwatering, or it's raining all the time. Things that in our, it's hard to imagine being a real problem, but when it becomes a problem, these guys can feed on some of those real vulnerable seedlings and very, very young transplants. Most of the arachnids are beneficial. There's very few that are really going to be a plant feeder, except for some of the mites. Spiders don't feed on plants. Ticks don't feed on plants. Tarantulas, scorpions. Most of our arachnids are predatory, which we always consider a predatory insect to be beneficial. Ticks, not so much. They are blood feeders, and so they're a medical and veterinary pest. But there are some mites, and you know them as spider mites, that can be plant pests and cause some pretty bad damage on certain species of plants. And then centipedes and millipedes, depending on what book you're looking at, they may combine them together as one class, but I think they're different enough to keep, I like the taxonomy where it keeps them separate. Centipedes are predaceous. They have venom, but they're not going to kill you if you're bitten by one. They don't want to attack you, but they have mouth parts. And if you grabbed me, I'd fight too. And, one of the ways I can fight is to scratch and bite. So they're going to do the same thing. Centipedes are flat. They kind of move like a snake, whereas millipedes are more rounded, more like a tunnel shape almost. And when they move, they kind of move like a train, really, really slowly, and long curves, whereas centipedes are just a little bit whippier and able to move around a little bit faster. Millipedes might feed on plant material, but it's the same as those isopods. There's tons of them, and there's a lot of moisture. And so it's a moisture issue more than this guy wanting to eat your plant kind of an issue. And so then that leaves you insects. And what makes an insect is that they have 3 separate body regions. They have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. The head is obviously where the eyes and the antenna and the mouth parts are. The thorax is where the locomotion part of the insect is. So it's really just a little ball of muscles there. And then the abdomen is where all the guts are. So it's the same as like our abdomen on us. It's the biggest part of the insect, usually, just like our abdomen tends to be the biggest part on us. And all insects have 3 pairs of legs or 6 total legs. So if you catch something with 8 legs, it's not an insect. If you catch something with 5 legs, it could be an insect that lost a leg, but they're meant to have, and almost all of them have 3 pairs or 6 legs. There are some species that are very primitive and kind of like regressed in a way, I guess, and they may not have legs, but they all the bugs have 6 legs. That's typically having 6 legs is what tells people, oh, I've got an insect that I'm looking at. They also have 1 pair of antennae, and the antenna can be very different depending on what type of insect it is. The antenna help them see, smell, hear, taste, feel, and smelling is actually the most important of those senses, because that's how they communicate with each other with, pheromones or chemicals that they emit that will give them certain cues that are a form of communication. I'm a friend, I'm a mate, I'm going to hurt you, or telling one another, like there's a fire ant coming up this plant, and the aphids will tell each other through pheromones, run and hide, kind of a thing. So the communication happens with their antenna. And even insects with small antenna, they're there. You just don't see it. Like if you think of a dragonfly, their antenna are not very noticeable. They're present. They're just not obvious because they have big old eyes, so they don't really need all that extra help to see. And then insects can have up to 2 pairs of wings. Some insects like ants have no wings. Some have only 1 pair of wings, like flies. They have little knobs that you can kind of see instead of a second pair of wings. But most insects can have up to 2. And like in the case of some insects, they have either a very leathery or very hard front wing that protects the membranous hind wing that actually physically does the flying. So some insects like a beetle, you think, oh, I don't know if I've ever seen wings on them. They're just hidden. That those top wings shut straight down like a clamshell, and they protect what's underneath very, very well. Insects and all arthropods have that exoskeleton, so they have to shed their skin in order to grow. And if you remember from the summer a few months ago, all the cicadas that came out of the ground, they leave that skeleton, that exoskeleton behind. And if you look at it really carefully, every part of it is covered with that exoskeleton, even their little eyeballs. When they come out of that exoskeleton, they're relatively soft, so they can grow, and then it hardens again. It goes through like a tanning process and it gets hard. They're stuck that same size until they can molt again. Once they've developed wings, they're not ever going to molt. They only molt in the immature stages. And this exoskeleton is very restrictive to an insect. It keeps them very small, but it's also how they retain moisture. So they, when you use insecticidal soap, diatomaceous earth, other abrasive type pesticides, you're cutting that exoskeleton so that they eventually dry out. They no longer have that shield to keep their moisture inside. And so they'll eventually desiccate. So we've, even though this exoskeleton is a benefit to them, it allows them to be successful, we figured out ways to kind of get through that. And that's why diatomaceous earth works against any arthropod that has an exoskeleton. And also that's why soapy water will eventually kill insects, or insecticidal soap will eventually do it. So also on that insect's head is their mouth parts, right? And if you are more of a primitive insect, you have chewing mouth parts. And this is a grasshopper that's being probed to make his mouth parts move. And we'll let this play a couple of times. But you see this kind of like mustache on top that's kind of moving up and down. That is akin to our lip. That's his labrum. And then he has a labium. So he has a bottom lip too, and our lips protect our teeth. And that's what these lips are doing for this grasshopper. And then you see these kind of black things that are moving side to side. Those are his actual mandibles or his teeth. So chewing insects have big mandibles like that are taking chunks of tissue out of a plant or eating a whole other insect or something like that. Those little fingers are called palps. They kind of help shove food in, taste a little bit for them. They're kind of like accessory parts to their mouth. And the insects that chew, there are lots of them: walking sticks, wasps, roaches, termites. There's many, many insects, silverfish that chew. But by and large, the 3 main types of insects that will chew holes in your plants are going to either be beetles, caterpillars, or grasshoppers. And there are other options, but 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, it's going to come down to one of those 3. So damage that they do is fresh tissue is taken out of the plant. You can see where he's come along and chomped all around. When it's a lot of material that's being eaten, that tells me it's somebody big. It's either a really big caterpillar or a really big grasshopper. The bigger the head, the bigger the mouth, the bigger the hole he's going to make. Some insects will kind of feed from the middle, kind of out. Looks like I can actually see it on there. So this is a little caterpillar that did it. This is probably grasshopper damage on the left. Middle picture caterpillars, and on the right hand side is most likely beetles, but beetle and caterpillar look really, really similar. So you kind of have to look a little closer to see if you see one on there or see one, in the soil close to that plant. But we've narrowed it down now from a ton of different types of insects to ones that chew, and just really probably one of 3 different types. And chewing insects are relatively lazy. They are rubbing their body all over the plant. If you think of a caterpillar, their body's on it. That grasshopper's belly is hanging on the plant. They're consuming whatever residual pesticide you may have applied to that plant, eating it, getting it in their gut, and getting sick and dying. And if they're not getting enough of it, they're at least getting it on their body, and maybe it's penetrating, or they're going to groom themselves and ingest some of the pesticide that way too. So while chewing insects can be very mobile and difficult to control, especially in the form of beetles and grasshoppers, they generally will consume a lethal dose most of the time. So residual products tend to work pretty well against chewing insects. Sucking insects, maybe not so much, because as you'll see, they have a little tiny bit of their body that's really touching that plant. So think back to the parts of the grasshopper's mouth parts. These have all just been modified to pierce something, whether it's another insect or plant tissue or skin, and then suck the liquid out of it. And so this guy has, instead of lips, he has like a big sheath that are now protecting just a single tooth. So that black thing in the middle is the mouth part that does the piercing and the sucking. And he's about to remove it, or they're about to remove it from those lips, and you can see how flimsy and skinny it is. And that mouth part's pretty long. So these types of insects are going to be kind of pushed off of the plant with that very tip of its mouth part penetrating the plant. So residual pesticides often don't work very well against somebody that does piercing and sucking. Because they're not rubbing on the plant. They're barely touching with the tips of their toes and the tip of their mouth part. So instead, we got to try to target sucking insects where they are. We have to actually do a little bit more investigative work and look for them. And typical piercing sucking damage is going to be wilted, deformed new growth, usually, existing growth that just kind of like all the juices have been sucked out of it, right? So it's kind of wrinkled up. You may, like on this bottom right-hand picture, have some dead parts of the plant that they've killed that might crumble out, but it's margined with dead. Other, chewing insects, they're taking real chunks out of that plant. Live tissue is coming out. And then sometimes if you can kind of pretend if you were to rub on this leaf, it would have a texture to it. So this kind of look is real typical of something that's doing piercing and sucking. And if it's an ornamental, maybe a systemic would work, because they will drink that pesticide as it is in the plant. Or we're looking for them clustered together somewhere so that you can spray them or do something to them, smash them with your fingers, because they tend to aggregate too. So some are mobile. A lot of them, though, will be real aggregatory, and they'll just kind of hang out somewhere. You just have to move some leaves to try to see if you can find them. Another thing that I think is important in understanding is the insect development, their metamorphosis, and what they look like, because the damage is happening in the immature stage. They're the teenagers, and they are doing all the feeding. We recognize the adults, but if we're able to kill them before they become adults, kill them in the immature form, we'll generally prevent most of that damage from occurring. And so we have 2 different types of life cycles. You either have a very simple life cycle or a complete life cycle. And they both have an egg that's laid, an immature stage or stages, and then the adult form. And the adult's life as an insect is really, the purpose is to mate and lay more eggs. Most of the growth and the action is happening as it's an immature. And once you become an adult, their purpose on the planet is just to make more of themselves. So it's a very minimal part of their life. So this kind of gradual or simple metamorphosis, incomplete metamorphosis, is an egg and then a series of nymphs or immature stages that eventually become an adult. So they don't have a true larva and they don't have a true adult form. And these are grasshoppers go through this, walking sticks, aphids, all the true bugs, I don't know, praying mantises, kind of more primitive insects do this because you're competing with mom and dad for food sources. And if you have and that's obviously not a beneficial thing. Here's just some pictures of them, up close compared side by side. They look really similar, but in reality, this guy's going to be a whole lot smaller. And their color and texture looks different because they don't have these developed wings that cover the abdomen. So it looks like a version of itself, but not exactly like a version of itself. So I always say that humans would probably do this type of metamorphosis because we resemble what we look like as adults. What we did look like when we were children or babies even, just not exactly the same, right? This is that leaf-footed bug that will get on your tomatoes, and we'll talk about these guys, but the little red ones that almost look like spiders, those are who you want to kill. Once you get to this form and they're actively moving, it's really hard to control them. I'm going to skip that one. And then there's complete metamorphosis, which most of us know because we learned this in school. And it's the typical butterfly where an egg is laid, a larva develops who does all the feeding. Then they get into this, quote unquote, resting stage. A lot is happening metabolically. They're just not actively moving, and they come out as an adult. And this is more advantageous because the larvae, like especially with butterflies, the larvae have chewing mouth parts and they're feeding on plant material. The adults have sucking mouth parts and they're feeding on nectar. So they're not even if they're on the same plant, which they generally aren't, they're not competing for the same resource on that plant. And usually she lays her eggs on one plant, but then goes and finds nectar off of another one. And here's a ladybug. This is an exception to that rule where they don't eat the same food, but it's, kind of good for us because they eat all the aphids for us. And, if you knew nothing about biology, if biology was a brand new subject to you and you never never read a book in your life, or never were curious, to look at that larva and think that it would become an adult, or even think about that butterfly, it doesn't connect. They don't look anything alike. It doesn't make sense. So it's a complete change in form from egg to larva to pupa and then to adult. Some of them do it and we don't see all of those life cycles. We only see that worker bee that is on the flowers, but there's a whole lot happening inside that hive. And then knowing that those life cycles will also kind of help you, if you're seeing immatures, understanding, okay, I think I know what order or what group of insects this might be a part of. But we have about 30 different orders of insects, but there's only about 10 that are probably very important to gardeners as far as identifying what might be feeding or doing damage on your plants. And we'll kind of I think we're going to go over all 10 of those. I'm not quite sure. And the reason why knowing the order is important is because if you have a field guide, most of them are grouped and organized by order. So you're either searching through that whole book page by page, or you're having an idea of what order or orders the insects could be a part of, and you're just looking at chapters now instead of the whole entire thing. And so one important order is Orthoptera. These are all the hoppers, and all of these have these enlarged hind legs for jumping. So the name hop is in that. Grasshoppers, crickets, katydids, these are all related to each other. They have an incomplete life cycle and can be incredibly destructive in certain years when they have major outbreaks, and also just kind of depending on where you live, because they tend to lay their eggs in pastures or prairie type areas. And if you live close to that, or you have that as part of your property, then you tend to deal with grasshoppers more than someone who's in more of an urban area where they don't have that pasture close by. And they have chewing mouth parts, so they're going to eat holes in your plant. And when you have plants that you think, just don't look very yummy. Like they wouldn't be very good to feed on. Usually it's a grasshopper that's feeding on them. And they can be incredibly destructive. In some years when they're so bad, we just tell people spray the heck out of the plants you want to salvage and just hope the rest come back from the root next year, because it's a lot of pesticide you have to put out when these guys explode like they do. Here's just some different pictures of some different grasshoppers. They're not just green and brown. They can have some really pretty coloration to them. So those are all the short-horned or short antennaed grasshoppers. Then these are the katydids, true katydids. This pink one, and then this one over here, these are Central Texas katydids. You probably might get them down your way, but what you more than likely get are these weird, crazy katydids, which are carnivorous actually, and they're not actually plant feeders. And most katydids don't do a whole lot of damage other than maybe up in trees, established trees where you don't notice it, but they can be very loud, especially like going into the fall months, starting early in the spring to summer and then in the fall. So like the off season of cicadas, if it's really loud, it's probably katydids. Most insects that you're going to come across, 9 times out of 10, you either have a true bug or you've got a beetle. Sorry, I couldn't get that out. There are a lot of different types of true bugs, and you can see from those images there, they are very diverse and very weird. We have medically important ones like a bed bug. Actually, that's not medically important, but like it's a structural pest, like you don't want to get fed on at night. Not transmitting diseases. So saying they're medically important is not accurate. We have assassin bugs. We have aquatic bugs. There are, I don't even know what a termite bug is there in that picture. But there's also a ton of plant feeders in this group. And these guys all have an incomplete life cycle. So the babies look similar to the adults, just not quite there with the color and whatnot. They have piercing and sucking mouth parts. So they're going to pierce into either plant tissue, skin, another animal, an insect, and suck the juices out of it. So they can only feed on liquid food. And you saw the video of that one guy, right? But this one's an assassin bug with a really short, strong mouth part that can penetrate something tougher like our skin. They have an incomplete life cycle. So eggs are laid, and then this is like early nymphs. These are a little bit older. You can see the coloring is changing. They're getting darker. They're resembling the adults a little bit more. So this is like newborn, toddler, teenager, something like that, as you start to look more like you're going to as the adult. They tend to, if they're plant feeders, be aggregating, which makes them easy to know if it's good or bad. If it's an assassin bug or a beneficial insect, they're going to not want to compete for food, for resources. So there's not going to be many of them on a plant. That's one clue that always tells me if I've got good guys or bad guys. A gang of bugs is always up to no good. A single bug, even if he's bad, no bug is so bad that a single one is going to mean that you got to spray the heck out of your plant. Yes, there are exceptions to that, like with certain invasives and things like that. But, a good rule of thumb is to kind of go off of that. So within this order, Hemiptera, we have the group of true bugs. And let's see, I'm going to annotate, and then I know that you guys are probably seeing a block, and I'm going to move that, but I'm going to keep it up for right now. So if you're a true bug, these insects have half of a hard wing and half of a soft wing. So if you took their front wing out, half of it is hard or leathery, and the other half is very soft. And the second wing underneath is all soft. But where their wings attach is kind of on their shoulders. So if you pretend that if you put a blanket over your shoulder and you fold it across the front of your body, pretending that those are wings, you're going to end up folding it over your body and having like a little triangle where the blanket is not on you, right? It's folded over. And that's exactly how these guys' wings look. So if you see an insect that has a triangle on its back, and this one is a very big triangle. It's hard to draw with the mouse. This one is also a really big one. It's connecting right here and right here, right? And then the wing is folding down. And then same thing, folding down. And so it forms this triangle here in the middle. And as soon as I see that, I know that I have a Hemiptera. And some of these are not real good. Like this is a little tiny triangle. This one has another little tiny triangle. It just depends, right? The wider the shoulders, the bigger the triangle, the thinner the back, the smaller the triangle. Just physics wise, that's how it works. Clear. I'm going to close that. And let me hide this so that you don't have to see it. So look for a triangle on the back, piercing sucking bug, most likely. Also, to know if it's a good guy or a bad guy, the assassin bugs, the predatory ones, have to look for their prey. The others don't. The others just shove their mouth parts in that plant and they just suck all day long. So if you look at on the bottom, the first two, those are for sure bad guys. They have big fat heads. They really don't have a neck. The next one on the bottom, the third one right here, he's probably an assassin bug because his head goes down into a neck. This one could be an assassin bug. I'd have to see its mouth parts to know for sure. This is an assassin bug. The third from the end is actually the last three are all going to be a bad guy because their head just webs right into their body. One kind of exception here is like this leaf-footed bug. We know it's bad, but its head is not really, it's not really making a real exaggerated indentation in to a neck. And that's what I look for. 9 times out of 10, you'll be right. Sometimes, like with this guy, you might get yourself a little bit wrong. Whoops. Whoa, sorry. The other way that you can tell if you have a good true bug versus a bad true bug is to flip it over and look at its mouth parts. So if the mouth parts are long, like this one, and like the stink bug that we saw in the video, where it goes past the first set of legs, then you have a bad guy. He's a plant feeder. Very short mouth parts, more like a beak than a tube. These are always going to be assassin bugs. So you can either look at the shape of the head or look at the mouth parts if you can get your hands on it. And that will tell you if he's a good guy or a bad guy. There's also other types of things in this order, Hemiptera. So a lot of the hoppers, frog hoppers, plant hoppers, tree hoppers, spittlebugs, cicadas, these guys have 2 sets of membranous wings. They don't have the half hard. So their wings still do make a triangle. You can see it on this little, I don't know, sharpshooter, I guess it is, a little leaf bug. Makes a little triangle in the back. If that cicada had its wings closed, you'd see that triangle as well. You can kind of see the start of the triangle on the back here. Same thing with that spittlebug. It just isn't, it's not like with the true bug, it was a different color here than where they overlapped at the back, where it was like just a different color because the membranous part was overlapping. So still see a triangle, but these are all hoppers. This is a tree hopper. This is a plant hopper. This is a spittlebug, the things that make the gooey spit on weeds and things in the spring. This is a, what did I say? Tree hopper, plant hopper, leaf hopper is what this guy is. And then cicadas are right here. Tree hoppers have a funny top, tree top. Plant hoppers are funny on the bottom instead. And then leaf hoppers look like an arrow to me. They have a little, an arrow-shaped head. Then the last group of these true bugs are weirdos. Some of them have membranous wings where they can have like a little triangle on their back, like these psyllids, the far corners, bottom and right, are psyllids. We got white flies. A lot of them have no wings at all, like aphids. Then there's really weird ones like mealybugs and scales that don't even look like they're actual insects. They look like warts on the plant. So this is a huge group of insects and very, very diverse. And that's one reason why if you find a bug and you don't have a clue what it is, go to the Hemiptera group and look at that first, because it probably is, but it's going to take you a while to get through all of those insects to kind of narrow it down. Thrips are also a problem for gardeners. Thrips generally tend to be an issue for your ornamentals more than anything, but they can be a problem like on onions and a few other vegetables, but it's mainly flowering ornamentals. Their mouth parts are more like it's like a chewing, sucking at the same time. They rasp and they, chew on the plant, and then stuff oozes out and they lick it all up. But most of them really like pollen more than anything. And then it's an accident that they're doing damage to the flowers. but they do a lot of damage to the flowers. They're itty bitty, teeny tiny things. If you have hibiscus or roses or anything else flowering right now, tap the flower, shake it on like a white sheet of paper, and you'll probably see thrips. They're going to look like little splinters. They don't even look like they're insects. They literally look like a splinter in your finger. They're really, really small and very thin, but they'll move, so you know it's alive. And the damage they do is, they cause this kind of if it opens, right? Sometimes it'll open kind of like this one does, like real tight and deformed. Or the bud never really opens, so it's never something you would cut and put on your plants. Or the edges are very bronzed, where they've been chewing on the edges of the flowers. On leaf material, you'll have these black spots. It's kind of got a stippled effect. This isn't a great picture, but black spots from both the feeding and their fecal matter that was left on the plant. If it's not a true bug, it's a beetle that you've got. And you tell it's a beetle also by the wings, because beetles, instead of half of that forewing being hard and half being soft, it's all hard. They call it an elytra. And when those wings snap shut, it makes a perfect line down the middle. So if you catch a bug and it has a straight line down the middle of its back, you have a beetle. It has to be a beetle. They have a complete life cycle. They have chewing mouth parts, and they're a very huge group. I heard once a statistic that said 1 out of every 5 animals that you come across will be a beetle. So there's lots and lots of beetles out there. They can be plant feeders, they can be predators, they can be decomposers. Any organic matter that's fed on, there's a beetle that will feed on that. Or any organic matter you can find, there's a beetle that will specifically feed on that. Some of them feed on hide, like the feathers and hair of dead animals. So all sorts, anything you can think of, a beetle can do it. And there's a lot of them. This is actually just one family of beetles, and they almost don't look anything alike. So sometimes if you've got a beetle, it's really hard to figure out what species it is. And I bet you maybe one in this whole group of beetles has a true common name that's been assigned to it. So some of them are just called, like, these are all leaf feeding beetles. So sometimes that's as good as you're going to get. And then if you Google leaf feeding beetle, the images will be endless of all different types of them. But the point being is that beetles are really, really, really diverse. And sometimes knowing exactly what species you've got, first, it doesn't matter. You can kill one beetle generally like you kill the others that are feeding on your plants. But just knowing exactly what it is, it's not necessary, and it's going to take you forever to figure it out. And we even have a beetle expert up at A&M, and there are several times I've had to send him beetles for other issues, and he says, I think it's this genus. That's as close as I can get you, and that's what he does. So what I'm trying to say is, if you send me a beetle, there's a good chance I'm not going to know exactly what it is. They have an incomplete life cycle, like I mentioned, and their larvae can vary from maggot-like to very active to grub-like because of the diversity of them. And neuropterans, which are good guys. All of these guys are good guys. The majority of the one that's really important is this lacewing, and we'll look at him also when we talk about good bugs, I believe. But they have owl flies and ant lions. That's a doodle bug that will turn into that ant lion. Here's the lacewings. We have green lacewings and brown lacewings. I don't know so much about the brown lacewings, but the green lacewings are really common. If you go outside and you see these little things, these look green, but they're really white. In reality, these stalks, she laid them flat on a leaf. The first one that hatched would eat its brothers and sisters as they wiggled their way out. So she lays them on a stalk because her larvae are so ferocious. So these are really cool, beneficial insects to have in the garden. And all of these have very lacy, lots of nerves in those wings, neuroptera. Bees, ants, and wasps are Hymenoptera. These are generally good. They're either predatory or they're pollinators. There's very few in this group that are considered really a pest, including ants. You can get ants in your potted plants and other things, and they're not really doing anything because they're all predatory. They're not plant feeding, so they're not hurting the roots. If they're doing anything, they're aerating that soil and eating soil-dwelling insects out of there. Bees are the hairiest and the fuzziest and the best at pollinating of the group of Hymenoptera and of all insects in general. Wasps are naked. They're very bald. They're not hairy like a bee is, but they're also predatory. And so they can be good. We have some like the true southern yellow jackets that are pretty nasty, and you definitely wouldn't want them in your yard. But if you can live and let live, they are doing good. Some are parasitic, where they are specific to laying their eggs, which allow their eggs develop inside of another small insect. So, I mean, these are just cool bugs. And then Diptera are the flies. Most of them are not really plant feeding, but more of a nuisance, like mosquitoes. You're going to encounter them out in the garden. You've got some flies that you may or may not get in your compost bin. But the beneficial ones are these syrphid flies. And I think we'll talk about these when we talk about beneficial insects. And except for mosquitoes, if you look at them, flies have huge, giant eyeballs and little antennae that look like a V coming out of their head. So that's how you would identify that this is a bee and this is a fly, not a bee or a wasp, right? Or this looks fuzzy like a bee, but those eyes are telling me it can't be one. It's got to be a fly. And then moths and butterflies, complete life cycle. These guys have chewing mouth parts as caterpillars that we may not like, but they are pollinators as adults. We have lots of really pretty ones. All of these are colorful and enjoyable to look at, right? They are striking, remarkable, and they're probably going to have, or they will have, very unique and pretty looking caterpillars. Caterpillars that also tend to be the most damaging, that are just green or brown or something like that. They will not turn into anything very pretty. So it might make you feel okay to know if you have to kill it, it's not going to turn into anything good or anything that really pollinates. Excuse me, I got a tickle. And then, of course, their damage is going to be holes in your plants. It could be leaf material. It could be trees. And there's even some that will do a pretty good number on your turf as well. So caterpillars are another big diverse group that feed on all sorts of stuff, but all on plant material. There's only one species that is predatory. We actually do have it in North America, but the chances of us coming across that are not common. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing this. I'm going to get into my IPM deal. Someone asked about kissing bugs. There was not a kissing bug on that image of the true bugs, but they are related to assassin bugs. So they would look, with the skinny little head, they would look a little bit like that. There we go. Okay, but I got to go all the way up. So it's going to make y'all dizzy. I'm sorry. So, what integrated pest management is, there's a long definition for it. My basic definition is to utilize all available control tactics to get rid of pests. And so while I'm introducing that, if you guys want to learn more about bugs, these are a couple different ways to do it. If you take your camera and you point it at the screen, and I know it doesn't work if you're watching this on your iPhone, but if you take a picture, the little orange thing or a little yellow thing will pop up, and you click on it, and it'll take you to a website where you can enter your email address to get information about upcoming classes that I'm doing, or like pest alerts, or whatever kind of stuff like that. Because I do have a monthly webinar that I host the last Wednesday of every month at noon during the lunch hour. So this month is veggie pests, like what fall veggie pests you should be seeing. It's like a 15 bug series. So we talk about the 15 ants you should know, the 15, bugs in your trees you need to know about, that kind of thing. And then I also have 2 podcasts that I'm a part of. The Unwanted Guests does not have any new. We stopped doing it, but it's still up there. But myself, Wizzy Brown, who I'm sure you guys know in Travis County, and then another colleague of ours up in Dallas, we do this Bugs by the Yard podcast. And we're talking about the bugs within your yard, within the confines of your fence. So what you might find in your landscape and or maybe even your house, but mainly, what's outside. And we do a bunch of different series of them too. Like right now we're doing spiders in preparation for, spooky season. So We're talking integrated pest management. And like I said, the simple definition is use whatever's available to you and relevant and works to bring pests to a level that you can tolerate. And that's kind of key because everyone's tolerance is different. I have a very high level of tolerance of insects. I just do. My feeling is if that plant's going to be eaten by those insects, I planted the wrong thing in the wrong situation or something else is going on. But I know other people don't. I am kind of like, let nature do its thing and, step in when you have, if you're going to lose something, but it was my fault probably if the insects are going after it. So IPM, integrated pest management, is ecologically based. So it takes into account that we're not the only things on the planet. You can't have zero pests or zero insects. There has to be a balance of stuff. And if we're trying to annihilate all of the bugs, we're affecting other things beyond just those insects. It doesn't rely specifically on pesticides. That's usually a last resort, and we're monitoring to justify that it's validated to use pesticides. But instead, and we'll talk about these, there are other things that you can do in that are non-chemical to help reduce and discourage the insects to come in. It's definitely proactive. It's not reactive. So you're not grabbing a can and reacting to an insect issue. You're trying to prevent that from happening by being a better gardener and being more knowledgeable about the plant systems that are out there. And those other options beyond just the pesticide, there's cultural and or sanitation type things that you can do, physical, mechanical controls, biological, recognizing who your good guys are and letting them take control for you. And then as a last resort and the smallest part of the IPM pyramid is pesticides. Doesn't mean no pesticides, but let's try to not rely on them so heavily. Let that not be our very first thing that we're using. And if we're going to use pesticides, let's try to use things that are more friendly to the environment, have a lower residual where they're not persisting quite so long, have less impact on our non-target things. So we're not causing a major, imbalance in stuff. So cultural control is what you're already doing, pretty much just being knowledgeable and purposeful about it. So it is manipulating the environment so that the good guys are happy or your bad guys are not. And you can do this disrupting the environment for the bad guys by doing things like figuring out where they like to lay their eggs and remove that. And we'll talk about it. Weeds are a huge thing that some of those bad bugs require to lay their eggs on. Well, if we have less weeds in our garden or in our landscape, we will always have less bad bugs. Where do they go hang out when they're not eating on our plant? Can we remove them from the environment? Can we, what are things that we can do to disrupt their life cycle in some way? And you have to know something about what your insects are. You have to be able to identify them and have a little bit of background about them. Cultural control, first of all, purchase things that are clean and healthy. When you go to the nursery, don't assume that the bugs aren't on those plants. It's plants. They will find it. Look underneath the leaves. And if the insects are there, they're going to be on the bottom side of the leaves, or the bad bugs are going to hang out underneath. So this is an eggplant leaf, I think, but there are aphids all over it. That stuff that kind of looks like dirt, those are aphids. If you can get yourself a loop so that you can, or a magnifier, so you can see things more clearly, you can differentiate between dirt and a bad bug, right? And then if you have a plant that's heavily infested with something, know when it's time to cull those plants, when it's time to either cut them down to the ground, destroy them, pull them out of there, quarantine them somewhere far away. Because if you have this really heavily infested plant in your landscape, it's somehow stressed, and that's why there's lots of insects on it. And it could be a number of different reasons that stress out a plant, right? Namely, right now, it's lack of water and intense heat. But if you leave that in your landscape, very soon everything around it is going to become infested with these bad bugs. So you do want to destroy things that are heavily infested, be okay and learn how to be okay with killing certain stuff, pulling them up. And, otherwise, you either get rid of one tomato plant and have less, or you have no tomato plants because they just keep spreading all around. Same with your ornamentals. Sanitation in a garden is going to be weed control, but not only controlling the weeds within the bed, but thinking about what's around you. Like if you have a vegetable garden, maybe don't put that up against your back fence that backs up to an easement or the neighbor's property who, they don't care about their yard and it's all junked out. Or, just understand if you have turf right next to native grasses and weeds and things like that, that little strip of that turf is probably going to have some issues quite more often than the grass that is surrounded by other grass, right? So sanitation is important, reducing the weeds, cutting back on the weeds if you can, so that insects don't find harborage, they don't overwinter there, they don't go mate on those weeds. Weed control is a huge thing in pest management. And then try to choose some plants that are resistant. We have different varieties of plants. Go to, the USDA zone map and figure out what zone you're in and purchase the right plants for your zone. What you can grow down in Corpus is different even than us in San Antonio, and way different from them all the way up in Dallas, right? So, certain ornamentals are not going to do well. Certain vegetables are also not going to do very well, especially some of those cole crops. So plant the right thing. Somebody figured out what plants work for certain weather patterns. Trust that information and that data. It's science that has been proven and discovered, and it's there for us to use. Other cultural control things are just figure out how to make that plant happy and healthy. Water well, fertilize when you're supposed to. If you water and fertilize and you're really promoting good growth of that plant, the plant oftentimes can outgrow damage that the insect's going to do to it. So help it do what it needs to do. And then consider some plant-free periods or a little bit of crop rotation. And that doesn't necessarily have to be totally no plants. And this is not really something that you could probably do in your ornamental gardens unless you just have a lot of, seasonal color that is not a perennial. Instead, for your vegetable garden, change up what you're planting by family. So don't always have a tomato bed. Don't always have a cucumber bed. Switch up and move plants around, because most insects are going to be attracted to that family group of plants. And if you always plant the same thing in the same spot, they're in the soil. Their eggs are in the soil. They're not far, far away. And so they're constantly there. They just wake back up again after winter and they start feeding. And you'll find that over time you have more and more issues. But if you just rotate things around, move the tomatoes to another raised bed, or if all you have is one big raised bed, just kind of shuffle things around, you'll find that you will have far less insects than if you keep a consistent pattern of the same plants. Mechanical or physical control is disrupting the soil by raking it or turning it over, not necessarily tilling it, using some covers or some barriers. So prep that bed, prep that soil. If you're putting down mulch, integrate it into the existing soil if you can. It's a lot of labor, but it exposes eggs, pupa to the sunlight, lets them desiccate and die, and you have a smaller population. Using tomato cages or trellises and allowing things that are vine-like to grow up. Or even if it's like a squash plant, having a horizontal trellis, so it's just off of the ground by, a few inches, you are allowing for more airflow, so it's less humid and less conducive to insects. You are keeping it off of the ground so that it's harder for the insects to get to that plant. They're not having direct contact with the soil. So using some sort of that is a physical control. It's keeping them away from those bugs. Even by a few inches, it does amazing things. Spraying with water, so replicating rain when it's not raining. Instead of constantly relying specifically on your drip irrigation, just take the water and spray it. You'll knock down aphids and eggs and just some smaller bodied soft insects. When you think about when it rains, if we have decent rain every couple weeks, those are the years that we don't really have a lot of insect issues. But when the faucet turns off, that's when insects can really start to thrive, because the rain is not just naturally reducing their populations. And you can do this in a veggie garden. You can do this on your ornamentals. You can do it up in the trees if you can get that thing to spray high enough. You can use row covers with different kind of plant cloths. Shake the plant out first so you don't trap the bugs in there. But if things seem to be feeding overnight, then cover it up. Cover it up overnight and see if that helps reduce the pest damage. And then hand picking. Hand picking does so much. And if you're a good gardener and you're out there all the time and you can just, hand pick those, recognize the bad guys and hand pick them, it's a lot easier if you're not squeamish about it to do that than it is to go inside, get your spray, find it again and spray it down. Just grab them and smash them. Use your gloves. And then biological control is utilizing your good guys to kill your bad guys. In an open system like we have in our gardens and our landscape, it's not really good to release things because they go somewhere else. They don't really stay put. But when you have more of a closed system, like say a greenhouse or an agricultural system where they've got acres of the same food source, which means they have acres of the same pest, which means the natural enemy of that pest doesn't have to go anywhere else to find it. They stay put. That's when releasing beneficials works really well. In our open systems where it's like a hodgepodge of plants, right? We don't have the same monoculture of something. It just doesn't work as well. So what we can do is indirect manipulation. So we can recognize our good guys, cut back on pesticide use a more targeted approach of pesticides so that our beneficials stay and help do the good things that they're doing. And some good natural enemies that we have, of course, are ladybugs. And everybody knows what ladybugs look like as adults, but I think that we don't always recognize their larvae. So first of all, they've got these little orangey, golden colored eggs, and there are other insects that make that color. But if I see that color of egg, I assume it is a ladybug. I usually just leave it alone. Those eggs will hatch into these little alligator looking things. And gardeners will always say, oh, I killed them because they looked mean. If it looks mean, leave it. And, the things that eat your plants, they don't look mean. They look goofy. The mean stuff are the predators eating those bad bugs. So if it looks scary to you, probably leave it alone. It's probably that way for a reason. This one, kind of catty corner to that smaller one, is fat and ready to become a pupa. So they might have some reddish on them. They might be solid black with, this has a couple little red spots. Color varies, but to me, what they look like are little alligators almost, kind of, or little alligator tails, I suppose. And they love aphids, but they'll eat all sorts of other stuff. There's lots and lots and lots of species of ladybugs, and you hear about the Asian ladybug or lady beetle, and that stuff is going around in social media about how if it has an M on its back like this, kill it. Well, there's a lot of them that have that. This kind of doesn't, that one kind of doesn't. It doesn't matter. Right now, these guys are out there eating aphids, controlling pests. One thing that they do that's weird is they like to cluster and aggregate in the wintertime in nooks and crannies. And sometimes that can be underneath the eaves of your house, in the soffits of your home, or they squeeze in through a windowsill and they make it into the vents of your house. And that can be a nuisance. In that moment, it's a pest. But right now, they're great. Leave them out there to do things. They just have a funny characteristic. Up north, they are a much more serious problem than they are here. If you experience them here, it is a good indication that you need to seal things up a little bit tighter. So maybe consider it, it's a sign, or it's a symptom of something worse that needs to be fixed. Here's another ladybug cycle with the eggs. There's some weird little larvae that they have here. They'll turn into a pupa, which looks like a little humpback. And then out of that will come that adult. And I already kind of talked about these green lacewings, but they are by far my favorite beneficial to see in the landscape. If you leave your porch lights on at night, you're going to find them by the lights. They're very common in urban, whether you live in a tract home neighborhood or you live a little bit more out in the country, or you live on, an acre. Large land, small land, they're around. They like to rest in foliage. So if you kind of push and bump on your foliage and your bushes, they'll come floating out of that. You might see the eggs laid on your door frames, on patio furniture, on plants, on whatever. They don't really care. They just lay it wherever. And the eggs in the adults tell you have the immatures. And so maybe, if you're noticing that you have a plant that has mealybugs or aphids on it, give it a minute or two. See if nature will come in and take care of it before you feel the need to spray, because you might find, after a couple of days, they've taken care of that problem for you. We just always want to step in right away. And sometimes if you just back up and just, be patient, you'll find that they'll take care of it for you. Praying mantises are also beneficial, but they eat everything. They don't really care what they eat. So you've seen videos of them eating hummingbirds and other things. They're predators and they eat whatever they can, and they roam. So you can buy from the nurseries the egg cases, the Oatheca, but they're going to go to your neighbor's house more than staying on that plant. But it's a fun thing to do. It's just not always going to work. We have lots of assassin bugs, and wheelbug is a type of assassin bug. It's just a really big one. These, again, have the skinny heads and the long or the short mouth parts, short and thick mouth parts. This one's got his mouth part out on that Colorado potato beetle, versus the long mouth part, which means it's a plant feeder. Long mouth part and then this kind of fat webbed head says that he's bad. Short and skinny neck means he's got to be good. Most likely he's going to be good. Spiders are beneficial. Leave those in the landscape if you can. If you're scared of them, I mean, just don't kill them. Spiders also aren't, if you have a mystery bug bite on you, it's probably not from a spider. Spiders don't bite just to bite. They might bite you if they were sat on or held, or, you kind of earned it. You touched them first type of a thing. They're not going to come out at night and try to attack you. And they're not generally going to come inside unless there's something for them to eat inside. So if you have spiders inside, I always say, figure out what their food source is. Let's control that. And they're going to go somewhere else. But controlling the spiders it's kind of going to always be an issue if you've got other bugs for them to feed on. But we have lots of different species of spiders. And if you have them out on your plants, leave them alone, because they're eating small insects, even big things, and they're helping keep many of those things in check, because they can eat a lot. They eat, spiders worldwide eat, I don't know how many tons of insect mass every year. And then some other predators, paper wasps are good predators. They're feeding on caterpillars, others, like usually generally fairly soft-bodied things, think caterpillar-like, in addition to being a little bit of a pollinator. Those syrphid flies that mimic the pollinators with those in their big, gigantic eyes, their larvae are really, really intense predators. And they're generally the first predators I will see on plants once spring starts to become sprung, even when it's a little too cool for other things to be out. So these guys are really good things to find. And one way that you can encourage them into your landscape is to plant herbs and let the herbs bolt, or any other flower that has that teeny tiny little flower on it, like an herb does. But I know that if I let my herbs bolt, I will always get syrphid flies. It encourages the adults to come in, and if the adults are there, they're going to mate and they're going to lay eggs. That's almost a surefire way to draw them in. Big flowers, like you see here, they don't like as much, but those little flowers, they can't get enough of them. And so that leaves, the last resort, or the one you don't want to rely on, chemical control. And when I'm using the term pesticide, I'm using it to mean anything that is intended to kill, mitigate, prevent an insect. So, there's people use the term organic pesticides, natural pesticides, green, and I'll use all those three things interchangeably. They mean different things to all of us. But one thing to think about is that organic products are also pesticides, and many of these will react on the insect's nervous system. We have a nervous system too. So organic, natural, or green doesn't always necessarily mean that it's safer for us to be around, or even less impactful in the environment. There are times when synthetic products are going to be less impactful. So you just, whatever reason it is that you're using these products, do a little research, because you may find that you're really dead set on staying organic or green, but it's a counterintuitive, whatever you're using might be a little bit counterintuitive, just because we don't, there's a cultural term for organic and a cultural idea of it. But sometimes that idea is not the true idea. What we don't want to do, though, is rely on pesticides, whether they're organic or synthetic, at all. Because when you rely on them too much, then you end up getting resistance. And when you get resistance, then you lose your options of things that can work. We start to select for more of those species that are resistant to that pesticide. So say you spray for, like with the example of mosquitoes, you spray for mosquitoes and you kill off 90%, right? You're never going to kill off all of them. Well, that 10% that was left had something about it that didn't die when it was exposed to a pesticide. And they're now going to breed and pass that genetic information on to their offspring. And then the next time you spray, if you're spraying too often, you're killing 50%. And then pretty soon you're only killing 2%. You're not really seeing a dent in things. So we don't want to rely on the same product over and over again. Switch up your arsenal so you don't get that resistance, because we certainly can get it in our landscape. If you use pesticides as your only option, then it's going to be toxic to your non-targets, right? Your beneficials, your good guys. And then oftentimes, if we knock out our good guys in addition to that initial problem we had, we'll have these secondary pests that will arise that were never an issue before. And if they are, then it's a big, big problem. Like Colorado potato beetles are one example of that, like in the landscape. There are certain insects when people say this is a big problem, that's a red flag that tells me you used a lot of pesticide, probably because you left nobody to help control those guys, because they shouldn't be a problem for you, but they're allowed to kind of go unchecked. So we want to use that cultural control and mechanical control and the things that use our brain a little bit more than pesticides as our only option. One thing about pesticides to think of, and just, chemistry in general, is that everything's a poison, right? And with medicine, the same way. It's the dose that differentiates the remedy from the poison. So relying too much on it is actually going to make pesticides less impactful or less beneficial or less effective, and can make things worse, right? So kind of towing that line and understanding that you got to use other methods. We can't just rely on pesticides. And if you're worried about toxicity and like how things are going to impact you, this is a kind of the dose related graph or table. So when you use pesticides, the EPA, to register a pesticide, requires that company figure out what's called the LD50, and that's the lethal dose it takes to kill 50% of a test population. Usually it's rats or mice. And there's a dermal LD50 and an oral LD50, and there's another one that I never can remember. But it's basically that you spray them with it or you make them eat it, right? And when does 50% of that population die? And that's when you find your LD50. And that kind of helps the EPA designate which things are much more potent and toxic to humans than others are. So, and this kind of compares some other things to kind of give it more meaning in our brains, I guess. So methoprene is a product that, if you remember back in the day when we would use Frontline, and then they came out with Frontline Plus, the plus was methoprene added to it. Methoprene is an insect growth regulator. It prevents insects from molting correctly. And so they kind of come out deformed and they die. It is used for flea control and mosquito control and cockroach control and a lot of bugs. Well, if you ate the same amount of methoprene as you did sugar, it's just as deadly as sugar is, right? So kind of, it's very dose dependent. You got to eat a lot of it to get sick. Malathion, we know, being fairly persistent in the environment, it's just as deadly as consuming that much castor oil, and who on earth would do that? So it's relatively safe for human exposure, right? But as far as the environment goes, it kind of sticks around a little bit longer. So there's two different things I think you have to think of with pesticides. How does it affect me as a human, and really how does it affect the environment? And when we kind of push or encourage the use of green, natural, organic products, it's not because it's safer for human health. It's because it's better for the environment. Breaks down quickly. It's not sticking around a long time. So that's just something to keep in mind. Can't prove anything's absolutely safe, so just assume it's not. Just assume that everything is nasty, even if it's just horticultural oil. Read the label, see what it says to wear, what protective equipment to wear, because you just never know. And, if we admit it, nobody reads the label, but that label has all sorts of information on it. So what we can't control how toxic something is, right? That's in the chemistry, and that's out of our control. But we can reduce our exposure to things, which will reduce its toxicity. And we can reduce exposure by use things that are pre-made for us, pre-mixed. So we don't have concentrated formulations we have to mix up. Leave that to the professionals. Make the pest control guys do that. So we have granular formulations, baits, or those ready-to-use things, which most of us are using, right? It comes already and you just spray it down, hook it up to the hose, and the hose mixes it for you. Read the label, figure out what the appropriate clothing is. Most of the label will say to wear water-resistant gloves or whatever gloves, a long-sleeve shirt, but almost everything says wear closed-toed shoes and socks. Well, how many of us are out there in our flip-flops or our Crocs or something like that when we're, putting out fire ant bait or spraying our garden? Most of us. So, read the label and wear what it says to wear. And if your option is a product that says wear a respirator, long sleeves, a hazmat suit, or wear socks and tennis shoes, that's the one I'm probably going to choose because it appears based off of the label to be a little less impactful to my human health. And read the label. Label tells you everything that you need to know. There are different formulations for pesticides. So there's dusts, which are a dust form. So like diatomaceous earth is a dust. They're going to be a powder. There's baits, which are food for whatever the insect is. We have cockroach, termite, ant. Bait is usually what most people have used, but there's also silverfish bait and other things like that. And when a bait works, they go to it, they utilize it as food, and then they take it out of the environment and they share it with their buddies. Liquid or foliar sprays, you're spraying it on the plant and it's sitting on the plant, and then whatever comes and walks on it or feeds on it, consumes it or gets it on their body. And then systemics are usually applied to the soil, and then the roots of the plant take it up and it gets into the plant. And so we know that can, if it's a flowering plant, that can have some impact on your pollinators. But if it's not something that flowers, or if that plant is in such decline because you've got, hard scales on it that it can't flower, then, it's either let it die so the pollinators can't get it, or manage it so it will be able to flower next year and the pollinators can come to it. So, I would say there's few times that I recommend systemics, but I don't write it off completely because I think there are situations where it is necessary. And there are some products like neem that has local systemic properties. So if you spray it like a foliar spray on the plant, it'll be inside of it, but only locally, not all throughout it. So just maybe on that leaf, but not on the flower. This is just duplicated. And then the other two types are aerosols, which are very, very small particles that come out. And that's usually what we use for mosquito control because it gives a good mist and a good application. And then granular pesticides are like, it's a little ball of pesticide that you apply to the soil, and then you generally water it in or let it get rained in, and it binds to the soil and holds really tight to it. So it's generally like in the first 2 inches of the soil, making a barrier of anything that's going to crawl through. These are just like ways that pesticides get to them. So there's stomach poisons where they have to consume it. And some stomach poisons can't, if it gets on their body, it doesn't do anything to them. It has to get into their belly, versus contact pesticides, which get sprayed or touch them. So they rub on that plant, you spray it directly on them, that kind of thing. Like an example of a contact pesticide would be insecticidal soap or oil. It must be on their body. It doesn't matter if they eat it. It just has to coat their body for it to be effective. And then there's fumigants, which we don't really use as homeowners. Desiccants are like diatomaceous earth, or silica aerogel is another one where it dries them out. And really insecticidal soaps are the same thing. It's going to dry out the moisture, and so they die of I guess of lack of water. Yeah, it's not starvation, whatever it is. This kind of just tells you there's different formulations, dust, foliar, blah, blah, blah. There's different ways that it works, that it acts on them or gets into them. And then there's different modes of action. So some will affect the nervous system and make them like shake and twitch, like you've seen that cockroach on its back. Well, guess what? We have a really similar nervous system. So these are the ones that if you're very concerned about the effect of pesticides on you, that you want to try to reduce your exposure to. There's metabolic inhibitors. We metabolize things similar, but we metabolize on a much bigger level. So these can be impactful on us, but hopefully not that much. Hopefully you don't have that much that you're exposed to. Hormone mimics. We don't have the same hormones that insects do. Their hormones tell them to shed their skin, and we don't do that kind of thing. So hormone mimics are, on the scale of safety, that's going to be kind of on the more thumbs up side. Kind of same thing with physical poisons, but there's some that if you breathe that in, it's going to be abrasive in your lungs as well. So, we want to switch up also the mode of action of if you're dealing with the same insect over and over and over again, you never want to rely completely on only things that affect the nervous system, because there's a lot. You can change names and brands, but it's the same mode of action. So we would want to switch between nervous system to a physical poison, maybe a hormone mimic, moving things around so you don't get that resistance to stuff. The ways that we are going to become exposed to pesticides is we're going to ingest it, which I hope none of us would do. You may inhale it, which is probably not going to happen because most of us aren't using fumigants that much. Or it's going to be skin contact and skin absorption. And the way that most of us get contact or absorption from a pesticide is through our hands. So using gloves and not using the same gloves that are your gardening gloves or something else, making sure that you're washing your hands immediately after you're using pesticides. You know, we use it, it's on our hands, and we rub our nose. Oh, now it's inside your nose, or you rub your eye, or you bite your nail. You know, we inadvertently get it into our body. So just be aware that your hands are generally the way that it makes its way in, and wash them. If we look at that pesticide label, the front of the label doesn't tell you a whole lot except for maybe what it's supposed to be used on, and what the active ingredient is. But on the back side of that label, there's this thing that just unfolds forever sometimes, and it has a ton of good information on it. So on the front side, you'd get like the trade name or commercial name, which can change all the time. There are generic versions of it. So if you call and say, well, I use this product, I don't know what Touchdown is, but what I do know is what the active ingredient is. There's less of those, and they tend to not change quite as much. Those are easier for me to memorize, right? So when you see an extension fact sheet, or when we go into some of these specific insects, I'm giving you active ingredients instead of brand names. And then you just go to the store and find that active ingredient, whether it's a generic version or, you know, whatnot. You'll also have these signal words. Most products that we use have caution on them. It's rare and far between that you'll be finding things that have a warning, and you probably want to avoid those. The back of the label will tell you all sorts of stuff, like, what do you wear? Well, here's shoes plus socks, a long sleeve shirt, and long pants. That's your protective equipment to avoid getting that stuff on your body, right? You also will have information about storage and disposal, and sometimes it'll shock you. Like, you would think it would be heat that would degrade and break stuff down, and that usually is what it is. But in this case, it's saying don't let it get below 32 degrees. Go look at some of the stuff you've been keeping in your garage. It may say don't let it get above 100. Well, our garage has got above 100 this summer, so many of the products that you have aren't going to be effective any longer. It may tell you to triple rinse, or the equivalent. The equivalent would be, it's nearly empty. I'm going to add a little bit of water to it, shake it up, and I'm going to spray it on that same plant, right? And I do that. Oh, sorry, bumped my microphone. I'm going to do that 3 times, and that is going to be the equivalent of triple rinsing it. Now I can just throw it in the trash. I don't have to like take it to anywhere special. The other thing to look at on those labels is it will tell you like how often you can apply products. And it may, nowadays we have products that you can use anywhere, right? It's for vegetables. You can use it on trees, a broad label. But there will be a table back there that should tell you, you know, vegetables versus like foliage plants. So like for our vegetables, we're using things that we're consuming. It looks like we're using less pesticide, a little bit less as we mix it. Or I'm sorry, here it is over here. When it tells you to add soap, that's so it like sticks to the plant, not necessarily to be the abrasive, dry them out kind of thing, just to be a little sticky. But then also how often you apply, like every 7 to 14 days. And if it's telling me 7 to 14 days, unless I have tons of bugs that I'm trying to control, I'm not doing 7 days. I'm pushing it to 14. It will also tell you how close to harvest you can do it. And oftentimes how many applications you can do within the lifespan of that plant. So like if it's, you know, broccoli or something like that, even BT, which we know to be a natural product, will say you can't use it more than 8 times within this growing season or whatnot. So look those things up because those are important. And what we want to try to focus on or try to encourage using are things that are considered low impact. So those would be and these may not make any sense, but we'll look at them. Lower toxicity products, baits, botanicals, or microbe derived. So they have less impact on the environment, less impact on your non-target organisms, and hopefully less impact on human health. So soaps and oils are one of those. Soaps will take off that waxy layer, like I mentioned. Oils will actually clog up the holes that they breathe through, so they suffocate to death. And these are contact only. There's no residual whatsoever. And if there is, it is little to no. Like once it's dry, it's not effective. They're going to avoid the oils, even if there's blobs of oil sitting around. So this is for small insects that really aggravate, that you can actually hit with these products. Can you make your own insecticidal soap? Sure, I'm sure that you can. But I work for a state agency. And so what we have to tell you is use products that have been approved and labeled by the EPA for the use that you're using it for. Also, one thing to keep in mind is that many of our soaps have herbicidal properties. So, you'll notice that there's not a lot of home remedies that we're talking about in there. And that's the simple reason of it. Somebody got sued somewhere along the way. And so we can't really recommend those because there's not enough research done on it. There's some low toxicity inorganics, and this is where organic is a term that gets confusing. This is the true chemistry of it. There's no carbon in these products, and that's why it's not considered organic. Kind of our cultural way of thinking of organic is natural. These still might be those things that you think are less impactful, right? So diatomaceous earth is one of those. Silica aerogels, which is like a flushing agent. Sulfur, you've probably smelled products that are made of sulfur. Boric acid is a stomach poison. These are all things that are considered low toxicity inorganics. They generally have less toxicity on our skin, but you don't want to eat this stuff, but I don't know why you would. And they usually are killing them either by being abrasive or being consumed. Microbe-derived products, the two big ones that we can get our hands on are BT and spinosad. And I will tell you that spinosad, gardeners love to use it. I really like to use it. It is microbe-derived. It's like a byproduct of bacteria as it ferments. But we get resistance like crazy to spinosad. So if it's what you've been using all the time, you're going to probably notice, or you may have started to notice, that you're not getting the right kind of kill from it. And if that's the case, switch to something else for a little while, because you just got resistance, especially in thrips and roses. That's a big problem, and spider mites too. BT is a target specific product. There's BT for caterpillars, usually called BT worm killer. And then there's BT for flies, for fly larvae. So we generally use it for mosquito larvae. And it affects the gut. BT for caterpillars only affects the gut of caterpillars. You can eat that stuff and it's not going to make your stomach hurt. Same thing for the mosquitoes. Your $1 million racehorse can drink from that horse trough and be fine. Your koi fish can be in that water and it's not going to affect them. So these are things that are super target specific. That's all you're going to kill. So something's chewing on your plants. You're not really sure what it is. You use BT worm killer and the holes still persist. Well, you didn't kill what was hurting the plant, but you also didn't kill anybody else. If the feeding goes away or gets less, then you're attacking your caterpillars, but only those. All your beneficials are fine. Baits are also more target specific. So we have baits that are meant for fire ants, right? There's cockroach baits. There's other types of ant baits. It's food for that bad bug. And then they take it back to feed to their queens and their babies, and the colony collapses because of it, at least with ants. With cockroaches, they just kind of share it or tell their friends about it, and you hope enough of them die. But, you're putting out, because they have to eat it, they want to eat it, you're putting out less concentrated amount of pesticide because they put it right in their body. It's not like, like if pest control guy comes and he sprays underneath the around your baseboards, you're hoping that that bug crawls on it and gets enough of that pesticide. This is more targeted. They're going to come after it. If I have the option to use a bait, that's what I do, because it's easy, relatively safe use. It's not I'm not putting it out all over the place where the pets can get into it. It's, it seems like it's less, but with a greater impact. And then botanicals are things like neem, which comes from the root of a plant. Pyrethrum or pyrethrin. Pyrethrum, I think, is the chemistry, and pyrethrin is what it is called when it's in out of the flower or something like that. Same thing, comes from the chrysanthemum flower. Using orange oil or orange extracts, those are considered botanicals. So these are things derived from plants, and they should break down pretty quickly in the environment. But there's also an example in here where nature is not always so nice, and an organic or natural product is actually harsher on the environment than a synthetic product might be. And that's with rotenone, which is a little bit in a water system, and the fish are going to all die. It's really toxic to aquatic wildlife. It has been correlated, but not directly linked, I guess, but a correlation with a lot of neurological disorders in humans, like Lou Gehrig's disease and other things. It's used mainly today less as an insecticide, but as an herbicide. But it's just an example of where, just because it came from nature doesn't necessarily mean that you can roll around in it, or that you can, be flippant about using it and not assume that it's ugly. Just assume everything's ugly and you'll be a lot safer. Okay, so those are your low impact guys, the low toxicity inorganics, the baits, botanicals, microbe derived products. And then that's just kind of some teaching facts. So last 30 minutes, I think we have, I believe. If we end at 8, you just let me know and I'll stop talking. But I've got like some specific harmful insects that are in here in the landscape, and a lot on veggie bugs or veggie plants that might do some damage. So if you're battling someone in particular, this is kind of what I would recommend. And when you're talking about landscape issues, landscape plants tend to be the most vulnerable to insect damage when they're new transplants. They're really young and they're very small, and you're just getting that landscape started. But if you think about it, there are plants in your yard you don't really worry about. You really don't think too much about your trees. You don't think about those, those perennial bushes, the deciduous shrubs or things like that. You just don't think about those well-established, very, very large plants. And if you're having an issue with some of those well-established plants, there's probably something going on that is something we've done wrong. So, do a little investigative work. Is that plant getting too much or too little water? Is the soil not draining properly? Is it draining too much? Is it getting too much sun or too little sun? How old is that plant? Things don't live forever. Even giant oak trees don't live forever. So if you have, trees in your yard, like for example, I'm sure it's down there too, but in the 80s and early 90s, every developer planted Arizona ash in all of these subdivisions. And those trees only live 30 to 40 years. Well, it's been 30 to 40 years, and those trees are naturally dying. And people think, and when insects come in to take advantage of a good situation, people incorrectly assume it was the bugs that did it. But in reality, they're helping put it out of its misery, right? Also, is it the wrong variety? Did we plant it in the wrong place? Did we plant it at the wrong time? If you're doing, this is not really for landscape plants, but for vegetables, if you go to Aggie Horticulture, or I just Google Aggie Horticulture fall planting guide or spring planting guide, and it will tell you based off of where you are, what window, how many, this date to this date is when you want to plant green beans or, broccoli or whatever. Follow that information, because sometimes if you do it too soon or too late, you are encouraging bugs to come in. There's a reason why somebody figured out that was the window to plant those things. So common in our landscape is going to be aphid issues. So I would think, I would consider what time of year it is. Is it happening right now? You could probably treat that plant because you might get some more flowers out of it or something, right? Because we still have a couple more months before things get cold. But if it was November and you had aphids all over your crepe myrtles or some other ornamental plant, I would say don't worry about it, because those are going to drop leaves very soon anyway. And you're not going to get flowers out of that plant between, November and when it does freeze. So just let the aphids eat it. That what would be the point of spraying except just to say I killed the aphids, because you're a plant's going to still do what it's going to do. It's still going to drop its leaves. We generally get aphids when we have overcrowded situations. So you might have to thin out some of your leaves, get some airflow going in there. That poor air circulation causes humidity, and then they just thrive. They just kind of go crazy. They go by unchecked. Overwatering, especially with drip irrigation, will promote more aphids because the humidity increases. But also, if you just replicate rain, you can wash those guys off of those plants, and you don't kill all of them, but you kill enough of them, makes less of them, and makes it a little easier to, maybe that plant no longer shows the damage in the way that you don't like it to look, Aphids are pretty wimpy. So insecticidal soaps, horticultural oils, anything that's labeled for that plant should kill them, but so we'll just water. And you just kind of have to monitor them because they will just kind of out of control go crazy. The other thing to think about is if you're applying a pesticide and you applied it to this leaf and you killed 86% of those aphids or so, the ones that are left behind will pop out identical clones of themselves, which can then very quickly pop out more identical clones of themselves. So you don't ever spray and never come back to it. Continue to monitor it, because what you might find is, oh my gosh, I sprayed with whatever and I just made more of them. And you kind of did, because they just made, they can reproduce so quickly and they want to fill the space that you knocked down. And they do that when they make clones of themselves. They do that without, it's almost like a cancer. It's just, they breed without caring that there's a food source for them. One thing whiteflies will do, I'm sorry, not whiteflies, but aphids, is if you have a plant that you're pretty sure should be blooming, otherwise it looks fine, look under the leaves and see if you have aphids under there, because aphids will a lot of times just stress that plant out enough that it has no more energy left to put out a bloom, but the rest of the plant looks fine. And if you come in with an insecticidal soap and do a quick knockdown, you might find like within a couple days, you'll start to get buds. So sometimes a plant that should be blooming and isn't, but otherwise looks fine, just has just enough aphids that it's preventing that bloom from occurring. So that will happen with like cucumbers and tomatoes also. Whiteflies usually are a problem in the early part of the spring, but I would always suggest, even if you're finding tons of them on your foliage, take a step back, take a good look at that plant. Is it growing? Is it green? Is it blooming? Is it doing what it's supposed to be doing? And if it is, a good rain and aphids will, those whiteflies will kind of be off of that plant. So, rarely a well-established landscape plant do these guys cause a big issue. Insecticidal soaps, horticultural oils, neem, those will all give you a pretty quick knockdown. If you need something that's going to last a little bit longer than acephate, which are generally ortho products, those will give you a little bit longer residual. The adult whiteflies will fly, but the nymphs kind of almost look like, I don't know what they look like. They kind of look like mealybugs or something, and they will be stuck on the plant. So when you spray, you're killing those babies for sure, even if the adults fly away. You guys probably often have more lace bugs than we do in San Antonio, just because you're warmer for a whole lot longer and more humid. But lace bugs thrive when it's hot. So if you have a lot of those tropical flowering plants, azaleas, we get them on lantanas really bad. Just other flowering plants that do well when it's hot, you might see lace bugs. Lace bugs are kind of cool looking if you look at them up close, but underneath these leaves is a mess. It's their babies, it's the adults, it's all their poop. They're there because you see them there. And they'll cause this stippling effect where some leaves will come out looking good, but some of those older leaves are like faded and bleached almost. Insecticidal soaps and horticultural oils and neem oil, and really most synthetic products. You can use like the chrysanthemum varieties, pyrethrum, but synthetic pyrethroids will also do the trick on these guys, or reduce the temperature in some way if you can by watering more. If it's a potted plant, move it into the shade, that kind of thing. For thrips on your ornamentals, especially on roses, what I will do is just as soon as that bud is starting to open and you can tell it's not right, it's tedious, but I will snip and I will I will not just let them drop down because it's a thrips bomb, but I will snip them and put them in a bag and throw them in the trash can, or burn it if you can, or, do something, throw it in rubbing alcohol, do something to destroy it, because they're just crammed inside of those blooms before they've opened up. And as soon as you let them open up, then they get everywhere. The best way to control thrips is to try to reduce weeds, mow very low if you have like a native area that's close by. And most things will work pretty well against them. I don't think I would use I would use horticultural oils, but insecticidal soaps. But you're almost going to each bud and spraying them to try to get it in there for those thrips. So I've used acephate. Neem oil works pretty well too. Spinosad, just don't rely completely on the spinosad because you'll get resistance really, really fast. But these tend to be a big problem in the spring when everything's trying to bloom. So like March through May, and then they might die off because it gets too hot. But sometimes they can be a problem year round. Spider mites are another heat-loving pest, just like those lace bugs are. And depending on how hot we stay, we might see them all the way through October. So cultural control-wise, you can do things like water a little bit more, increase irrigation, cool the soil temperature so that it radiates up on that plant and they're not thriving. The reason why they do best when it's very, very hot is because their predatory mites don't. And so there's nothing that's eating them. So they're just thriving. But even things like, I want to dump out my, ice bucket every day, ice maker, dump it out and put it on the soil of that plant. Just doing something to cool things down can significantly reduce those spider mites because they're usually managed very, very well by predatory insects and predatory mites. They're very tough to control, only for the simple fact that these are mites and they're not insects. So like bifenthrin, acephate, sulfur products, those can work. But you have to get a product that it actually is a miticide. So make sure that it says mites on the label and you're not just looking for that active ingredient, because although it may have the same active ingredient, it may be formulated for insect control as an insecticide and not as a miticide. So that's something to really keep in mind and can be very frustrating for gardeners. Some people will do companion crops of marigolds. And so it's a trap crop. You trap them in the marigolds because they will explode in there, but you got to nuke the heck out of those marigolds with a pesticide. Otherwise, they just move into your other stuff. It's not like it's going to trap them there and they're not going to go anywhere else. It's going to make them go to a spot that's easier for you to treat. Mealybugs and scales. Some scales will really not hurt a plant, but just might kind of affect the overall vigor, especially the soft body scales. And these are, oops, oh, I'm sorry. Hold on a second. Let me do something really fast. Oh, I can't do it. Okay. Hide this again. Okay. Some of these softer bodied ones where their body is attached to the wax versus the hard scales like these guys, where if you can peel that off and there's a scale underneath it, it's not the scale, the hard thing is not attached to them. Hard scales will kill a plant. So if you have hard scales, you want to use a systemic, probably. That's usually the only thing that will work. Or you can expect that bush or that large ornamental to die. Soft scales, you can control a lot better with oils, neem oil, physically, just, like rubbing your hand along the branches with your garden gloves on to physically smush them. And then one thing that you can try to do too is get a little bit of double-sided sticky tape and wrap it around your plant. If the damage is here, and you want to know, are they crawling? Are they active? And are they exposed? Because they lay these little pouches and these are little babies that are going to start crawling, and they are much more susceptible to pesticides. So when you start seeing them stuck on here, oh, now's a really good time to treat because they're out, they're moving. And that's also when they die, they kind of stay stuck on the plant too. So using this just simple sticky tape, or a marker in some way to see if they're moving up the plant. If they've stopped moving up the plant, they're dead. They're just stuck to the plant. So you don't have to keep applying or spraying or worrying about it. But use markers, use sticky tape. So you know when you find them stuck to that tape, I want to treat now. And probably in 2 weeks later, I want to treat again because there's probably going to be another egg explosion that might happen. Beetles are leaf feeders. There's a whole lot of them. And usually it looks like little shotgun holes all over a plant, right? Like someone hit it with a BB gun. And that plant's going to have a really hard time growing because it's having to replace itself there, you know? So young transplants, if it's a young transplant, pull it up and start with something bigger. But if it's an established plant, you can either wait them out, cover them when it seems like the damage is occurring. Usually it's kind of overnight, or you can apply either a dust or a foliar spray. Both of those will work pretty well against these guys. Carbaryl products on your ornamentals. Neem should work well. Permethrin. Spinosad doesn't work very well against beetles. I don't know why. I guess they just don't get enough of a toxic dose. But Carbaryl, neem, permethrin are better options for you. And just know they're mobile. They fly away. So it's hard to kill these guys sometimes. There's lots of different types of caterpillars. The good news is that it doesn't really matter what the caterpillar it is. You kill one like you would kill all of them pretty much. So, you know, if you've got them making webs around your trees, break those webs open. These are fall webworms found all year, like even during the spring, but in the fall, they're the biggest, they're the most. They make this webbing and they feed on the leaves inside the web. So they're protected. If you can break it open, let the birds and let, you know, other things eat it for you and see if that helps. You can't just spray. You do have to always break it open. So maybe break it open and see if nature will do its job. And if it doesn't, then you can apply a pesticide to it. But BT or spinosad work really well against caterpillars. BT is specific for them. So you're not harming anybody else, any of your beneficials, any of your birds, anybody. You don't have to worry about that. Permethrin will give you a little bit longer residual in your ornamentals if that's what you need. And if they're in trees, just pretty much anything that's labeled for that tree. So middle picture are bagworms. They're mainly a problem on juniper, but rarely are they really a problem for us. And then others will do like the skeletonizing. So they just kind of keep eating those leaves and the plant can't photosynthesize and it has to make more leaves instead of growing like you want it to. Now, when you're looking at vegetable pests, when things come in and damage your plants early on in that growing season, it's usually something we've done wrong. We've planted a crop that's just susceptible. And the good news is that we're not farmers and we're not growing these as our living. And if all of our squash gets eaten up and we can't grow any, we can at least go to the grocery store and pick it up, right? Some years there are just years when a certain insect is going to eat the heck out of a certain plant and there's not much you can do about it. Other problems could be we have a cultural issue, like we're stressing them out in some way because we planted them in the wrong place, just wrong situation, wrong crop, wrong something, right? Some cultural issue. When it's later on in the season, these are generally a cleanup crew. And a lot of times, well, all the time, right? Your vegetable garden is kind of on this rolling schedule where things are dying off and the rest of the garden is still looking fine. So knowing when it, not putting it in the December 2nd, that's the day I'm going to pull everything up. That may not work, right? Because maybe in mid-November is when some of that stuff should have gone away. So just being aware of like when things have given you all that they're supposed to give you, how much should that plant give you? If it gave you 5 pounds of squash, maybe that's all it can do, right? And if you try to get it to give you a little bit more, that 1 or 2 more squash might actually cause more issues for your other plants than just giving up on that one plant. So know when it's time to say goodbye, know how long those things should give you, because the late season invaders tend to be a cleanup crew. And as the first plant dies and they come in to clean it up, they can move over into those that are still able to produce for you. Old plants that are dead and dying will always attract bugs to them. That goes for any species of plant, whether it's a vegetable or an ornamental or anything. So if we break it down into some of our, typical types of families or types of plants that we grow in a vegetable garden, if you've got tomatoes, you generally will have tomato hornworms or leaf-footed stink bugs as your issue. I don't think I have a slide in here about hornworms, only because we already talked about caterpillars. So BT and spinosad, or go out with a black light and it will illuminate at night and pick it off and smush it, step on it and get rid of it, because they tend to feed in the evening, on warm evenings, especially. But leaf-footed bugs are really aggravating because they cluster like this. They reduce the vigor of the plant. They might turn that tomato like really rock hard or bitter or just not edible to us, or it could have a rotten spot in it. And the babies are who you want to kill more so than the adults. So to me, the easiest way to control leaf-footed bugs is if they're on a single tomato or a couple of single spots, you can go out with a cup and fill it with some rubbing alcohol and just flick that plant. I wouldn't dunk it in the rubbing alcohol, but flick it and they'll fall off into your bowl or your cup, and you killed however many fell into there, right? If they're all over the plant, then take a shallow pan, a cookie sheet, fill rubbing alcohol in the bottom of it, and then just shake your plant. And they'll fall down into that rubbing alcohol and die pretty much immediately as soon as they touch that alcohol. And if they don't, they're not going to crawl very far because that alcohol will dry them out really, really fast. They make bug suckers and vacuums that you can use. They're just real fast. So I think the jarring movement is a lot better. There are some synthetic pyrethroids that you can use and spray, but you're not touching that plant with any pesticides when you're shaking it. It's a little more labor intensive, but not really all that much. And rubbing alcohol is pretty darn cheap at the grocery store, cheaper than a lot of these pesticides are. But you have to be a good gardener. You have to be checking them often and try to catch them before they all become very mobile as adults. The babies can't fly away. If you're growing cucurbits, you probably deal with squash vine borers, squash bugs, or cucumber beetles. And so cucumber beetles, we've got spotted, striped, and banded. If you went clockwise, that's how it is. They tend to, when they're the most damaging, it's when they're feeding on the leaves. And so the plant can't grow. It will never get to the growth point it should be for that growing season. In some years, they're just awful. And it's been a while. It's been a few years, but like 18 or something was an awful year for cucumber beetles. Everybody just had to give up on them. They might also feed on the fruit, and you see that damage in those pictures. They're just scraping that skin. The food on the inside is totally fine. You would eat that out of your garden. You just may not buy it from the grocery store. But all that really tells you is that it's sweet. It's ready to go, and maybe should have been picked a couple days ago. They're detecting that sugar ratio inside of there, that kind of sugar-water ratio. So for cucurbits, rotate your crops. Don't plant cucurbits, any family of cucurbit, in the same spot in your garden from season to season. Switch it completely up, move them around. If you have an issue with them, or if you tend to notice a lot of these early on in the spring, then probably don't use seed. Go with transplant, because seed's going to be too vulnerable. A transplant's already got going and it may outgrow damage these guys do. You can use floating row covers. You just, use that screen, you kind of put stakes in the ground, float it over there so you're not mashing that plant down, and then move it once it's hit a certain growth that you like and you think that it can, outgrow the insects. That kind of plastic mulch, they don't really like that very much. Any kind of mulch up around it, because they will lay their eggs in the soil, and so they don't really like to get through that stuff, the mulch. Carbaryl is probably the best option when you have huge numbers of these guys. But if they're not in giant numbers, water and fertilize, get that growth going so they outgrow the cucumber beetle damage. Squash vine borers are a type of moth that flies around during the day, and they're really aggravating. They lay their eggs on the squash, and then the egg hatches and the little caterpillar chews into the vine, and it grows and gets big and poops, and it clogs up the vine. So the roots can't get nutrition to the end of the plant. And you see the plant die from the end terminal end towards the roots. And once that's happening, it's too late for anything. So, and kind of, you go outside and it's starting to die, and it's really frustrating because that plant was about to give you so much and it was looking so good, and then it's just not. So things that you can do is treat that vine once you start finding adults. There are squash vine borer moth traps. This is a pheromone trap that you put in a little triangle sticky thing. It's sticky at the bottom there. And that little kind of looks like a red pencil eraser. That's just a little rubber piece, plastic piece that is impregnated with this pheromone. The pheromone smells like a girl. And so you catch male squash vine borers. Well, if boys are looking for girls, they're looking to mate. So it gives you, okay, now I need to think about treating my vines because they're laying eggs right now. It gives you this window, or a better targeted time period to try to prevent the issue. You can try yellow pan methods. I would do the pheromone trap. It's just a whole lot easier and a whole lot more, you're getting them and not something else that just fell in that yellow bowl. So once you're catching them, you can spray those vines. BT or spinosad are two organic options. You might get a week or less as a residual. So now you're going to have to come back out every week and treat if the label allows. Carbaryl 7 products may give you up to 2 weeks. Permethrin, bifenthrin, cyfluhalothrin, the thrins, the synthetic pyrethroids, will give you about 2 to 4 weeks. Esfenvalerate can give you up to a month. So you can, decide, what product do I want to use? How often do I want to be spraying these vines? You can also look for their frass. It looks like little clear green bubbles almost. And if you see that where they've kind of kicked out their poop, you can slit the vine and try to pull it out there. So, but either way, you're out there looking at those vines and checking those plants quite a bit. And it's pretty labor intensive and it's really irritating. And some gardeners just give up completely when squash vine borers become a problem. But also pull up residual crops. Don't leave them out there, especially after the squash vine borers are in there. Completely destroy the plant if you can. Squash bugs also get on your squash. Sometimes on other things, but they're at squash first. They have these little brown eggs, and what I'll usually find are the adults mating, and then I'll see the eggs that are right there. Let's see. Sometimes you see like a flaking of the plant, and it almost looks like it had hail damage or wind damage, and that's damage there done. And then eventually the leaves all turn yellow and fall off. Nothing survives, and your squash is just kind of dying. So don't use mulch because they tend to hang out at the base of the plant, at the vine coming out of the ground. So pull mulch away because that's more hiding places for them. As soon as you start noticing them, start using pesticides. Or I do truly think that these are one of those insects that you can effectively manage by hand picking, constantly turning leaves over, smashing the heck out of those guys. When they become adults, they don't really fly very much. And I just go out with scissors and I cut them in half. I mean, that's how slow they are. But you're just reducing that population as often as you're going out there and checking your plants. And it is tedious, but it can be very effective. Same thing, destroy the residual crops, turn that soil over, just rake it, kind of massage that soil a little bit so that anything in the soil is exposed to the sunlight. And then we got 5 minutes, common cold crops. Harlequin bugs, cabbage loopers. I'm going to do the quick and dirty about this. Harlequin bugs, if they're after your cole crops, it's because you left them in the ground for too long. They are a cleanup crew. And cabbage loopers, use BT or spinosad early on, every 2 weeks, because by the time it starts making a head, they're just feeding on the outside, but you want it to get to the point of being able to make a head of cabbage, broccoli, whatever it is that it's making. But BT and spinosad work really well. The last one here is fire ants. Just use fire ant baits. Fire ants love vegetables, okra, all kind of stuff, and they're irritating when you step on them. But we have tons of different types of baits that are super duper effective. Come and Get It from Fertilome is an organic, or I think it's OMRI certified, but it is the only one that's labeled for inside of a vegetable garden. But you can use just regular old Amdro outside of your vegetable garden. They're still going to forage and pick up that food. I think that is back to getting getting on my email list, but sorry. Let me go back up there for you. I'm going to check out the chat and see if you guys had any questions. Someone just had a comment. If you do have any questions, I know we're right up on the time and there's only so much you can hear about bugs. But feel free to throw them in the chat or unmute yourself if you'd like to. There's not a whole lot of us on this call. If there were any that I didn't cover that you needed covered.
You guys can unmute now and ask questions.
Molly, I have a question.
Okay.
Um, we've got just tons and tons of mealybugs, and we've tried all sorts of methods, like dealing with ants and all the stuff that are associated with mealybugs. Um, I was really worried about what you said about the systemics because systemics are super effective for mealybugs. If we use a systemic on a flowering plant, does it necessarily mean that that is going to kill all the pollinators? If the plant is in its active flowering time, or there's some that don't do that?
That it will be probably in that pollen and in that flower, but read the label because if you follow it according to the label, it usually will tell you when to apply that systemic, and it's not when it's flowering most of the time. But then there's things that you have to think about, right? Like if that plant's not flowering because it's so sick with those mealybugs, then it's not like pollinators are going to come to it anyway. So it's totally situational, and if it's the only thing that will work, it's the only thing that works. So it's sometimes you just have to do it, right? What are the mealybugs on?
They get on lots of different plants that we have, but mostly our hibiscus.
Yeah. Yes. I actually just read or found a fact sheet because someone had emailed me about that also. Well, actually, if you look up um, Mike Merchant, who's a retired entomologist from Extension, he has a website called Bugs in the City, I think. But if you just Google like Texas A&M AgriLife hibiscus mealybug, I want to say that's where I found some information for this woman. But he was talking about what to use to try to manage those on specifically hibiscus. And then I think University of Florida also has a pretty good fact sheet on it too. That they may have an option that you haven't tried, but if a systemic's all you can use, and that's all you can use, and some of them aren't going to last in that plant very long either. So that's something to kind of, do a little research on. It may only be 3 months, and you do it like first thing in the spring when it's really stressed out and the mealybugs are on it and it can't bloom. Or you do it now and you knock them down when they're really not blooming. And you're not going to have to worry too much about your pollinators.
Okay, that's a little bit of a relief to think about the timing. And I did write down the name of I didn't get the guy's what was the guy's name again? Did you say
Mike
Mike?
Merchant,
Merchant.
Merchant. Bugs in the City is his website, or was his website. Someone else is doing it now, but all the articles are from him.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Molly, hi, this is Veronica. I have a question. You had mentioned in the lecture about fire ants, but we have a problem in our area with red harvester ants. Do you
Yeah.
have
Um,
that? 'Cause we have multiple sites with that.
um, you know, you can try Amdro or something. Is that they are seed harvesters, and so they will pick up bait, but they won't do it as readily as a fire ant will. And there's just really nothing labeled for them because they're considered beneficial since they're a primary food source for the horned lizard. So if you can live with them, I mean, they're not hurting any plants or trees or anything like that. But if they bother you, you kind of just have to continue to bother them and see if eventually you can kill them. You can try to pour something down and or around their in their entrance. You can try Amdro ant block, but I have never done a study where I've tried to kill them, so I don't know what works very well against them.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I do have one more thing I'm going to throw up here. As y'all are asking questions, if you're thinking about beekeeping and you need info on beekeeping, I have an online course because I know you guys aren't close, but this fall, if you do the online course, I have a field day for it. That's the QR code for it, or it's also tx.ag backslash or this slash. I don't know if it's forward or backslash bees, BEES.
Thank you so much, Molly. It was really terrific.
Thanks, Kevin. No
And
worries.
thank you for staying up late for us.
Oh yeah, it's so late. You
Oh.
guys you see my email right there? Hopefully you caught that. If you guys have questions, feel free to shoot me an email. That number is the office number. I'm not always at my desk, but email is a good way to get in touch with me and to attach pictures so that I can identify stuff for you. If you ever have questions, feel free to send it. I'll be happy to answer it for you.
Or send it to me. I send Molly and Wizzy stuff all the time. So
He does.
all right. I hope y'all all enjoyed this. It was really terrific, and y'all have a wonderful night. Okay.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Good night. Good night.